They built massive palaces with running water, they traded across continents, and they wrote in a language we still can't fully read. But most people have never even heard of them. Before Greece, before Rome, and way before the Vikings, there were the Minoans, Europe's first advanced civilization. This isn't just some boring prehistory story. It's a story of mystery, natural disasters, power, and a writing system that left more questions than answers. So let's dive into the ancient world of the Minoans, because history class definitely didn't tell you this one. When we talk about ancient Europe, most people think of the Greeks, the philosophers, the myths, the democracy. But what if I told you the Greeks weren't the first? What if there was a civilization, older and in some ways more advanced, whose ruins are still being uncovered today? Whose writing we still don't fully understand? That's the problem with history. It often forgets the civilizations that laid the foundation, and the Minoans are one of them. Their story was buried, sometimes literally, for thousands of years. Exploration/development. Part 1. Who were the Minoans? The Minoans lived on the island of Crete in the Mediterranean Sea. Their civilization started around 3000 BCE, so over 5,000 years ago, and they reached their peak between 2000 and 1450 BCE. That's over 1,000 years before classical Greece even existed. And their cities? Huge, complex, organized. The most famous one is Knossos, often called the oldest city in Europe. Knossos wasn't just a city, it was a palace, a giant multi-story complex with fresco-covered walls, storage rooms, workshops, and advanced plumbing. Yes, you heard that right, running water, and even flushing toilets over 3,500 years ago. While most of Europe was still figuring out farming, the Minoans were building palaces and writing things down. Part 2, illiterate people. Now let's talk writing, because this is where things get really interesting. The Minoans used two main scripts. The first was called Cretan hieroglyphs. It looked a bit like Egyptian hieroglyphs, and we've barely scratched the surface of understanding it. Then came Linear A, their main script for keeping records and managing their economy. The problem? We still haven't cracked it. That's right, despite all our technology and knowledge. No one has fully deciphered Linear A. We know it's not Greek. We know it was used to keep track of goods like oil, grain, and livestock, but we don't know what the words actually mean. We're looking at a literate civilization whose voice is still locked behind an ancient code. Part 3, life on Crete. So, what was life like in Minoan Crete? From what we can tell, pretty amazing. They weren't a war-based society like many later cultures. Most of their art doesn't show battles or armies. It shows nature, festivals, and dancing. Frescoes from Knossos show dolphins, flowers, and people jumping over bulls. Yeah, bull leaping, that was apparently a thing. Young men and women would run at a bull, grab its horns, and flip over its back. Was it a sport, a ritual, a rite of passage? We don't really know. But it shows us something unique. These people weren't obsessed with conquest. They were all about the sea, trade, religion, and maybe a little chaos. And the women? They seem to have a much higher status than in other ancient societies. Many depictions show women in prominent roles, leading ceremonies, dancing, even possibly ruling. The Minoans were ahead of their time in more ways than one. Part 4, religion and myth. Speaking of rituals, let's talk religion. The Minoans didn't leave behind temples like the Egyptians or the Greeks. Instead, they had peak sanctuaries, shrines built on mountaintops, and caves, deep, dark places, where they left offerings to gods we don't know the names of. There's also a good chance the famous Greek myth of the Minotaur started here. According to legend, King Minos of Crete kept a half-man, half-bull monster in a labyrinth beneath his palace. The Greek story paints Crete as a strange, mystical place ruled by powerful kings. That's not an accident. The ruins of Knossos do feel like a maze, and bulls were clearly important to the Minoans, so it's possible that later Greeks twisted real Minoan culture into myth. Part 5. Disaster strikes. What happened to them? Why did this advanced civilization disappear? Well, nature doesn't care how fancy your palace is. Around 1600 BCE, a volcano erupted on the nearby island of Thera, now called Santorini. It was one of the biggest volcanic eruptions in human history. Ash rained down, tsunamis crashed into Crete, and the skies darkened. The Minoans survived for a while, but the damage was massive. Trade collapsed, crops failed, society started to break down, and not long after, another group showed up, the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. They took over what was left. And just like that, Europe's first literate civilization faded away. Their palaces burned, their language disappeared, and their story was forgotten. For centuries, no one even knew they existed. And until the early 1000s, 900s, when a British archaeologist named Arthur Evans uncovered the ruins of Knossos. He called them the Minoans, after the myth of King Minos. That wasn't their real name, but we still don't know what they called themselves. Even their identity is a mystery. Conclusion/summary. So let's break this down. The Minoans weren't just some random island people. They were builders, writers, traders, artists. They connected Africa, the Middle East, and Europe in ways we're still discovering. And they did it all thousands of years before the Greeks or Romans came into the picture. But maybe the most amazing part, we're still learning who they were. We've uncovered their buildings and pottery, we've seen their art and statues, but their words, still locked in stone. And maybe that's what makes the Minoans so fascinating. They remind us that the past is full of stories we haven't finished reading yet. Subscribe so you don't miss the next piece of the puzzle.